Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Explorers Club Access webinar series. My name is Arena, and I'm going to be your MC for the evening. We have a really amazing lineup of folks here to talk to you today. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to actually pass the mic over to Paul, who's going to tell us a little bit about the club for those of you who are new. Felix is behind the scenes running the show. Felix, if you could just tap the next slide. We have a roadmap for the webinar, so you just kind of have an idea of what to expect. So as I mentioned, Paul will talk a little bit about the club, and then Nanette is actually going to provide some context on the Access program, our goals, the origin, and what we hope to accomplish. And then we're going to get to the focus of the webinar, our wonderful panelists. So if you can just tap the next slide. Paul, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Irina. And if I could actually even start in the interest of inclusion, the chat's open to everybody. If maybe could we say, put in the chat where you are logging in from, please. I'll do it too. Portugal. Okay, that's a great one. Toronto, Canada, Scotland, Vancouver. This is Florida. This is cool to see. That is cool. So I think what I'm seeing is furthest away is Portugal or Scotland. I guess that depends on where you are, where you're starting your point. Furthest away from New York City headquarters might be Portugal or Scotland. That's awesome. Um, while those are continuing to come in, uh, only the hosts and panels can see the chat. Okay, so not everybody see. Thank you, Amanda. So there is a wide range coming in here. Wisconsin, that's awesome. Good afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, I guess, depending. I think it's at least afternoon, evening for everyone. My name is Paul Tangy. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, an organization that's been at the center of some of the most consequential discoveries in human history. Founded in 1904, our club has supported expeditions to the top of Everest, the bottom of the ocean, and the surface of the moon. And today, more than 120 years later, we're still here, still pushing the boundaries of what is known and asking what lies beyond. Our vision in the Explorers Club is clear: to be the global leader for exploration, not in name only, but in the quality of our science, in the breadth of our community, and in the depth of our commitment to the next generation. And that's why we're here today. The Access webinar series exists because we believe that exploration belongs to everyone, not just those who already know the right people or who grew up seeing themselves reflected in field research. Access is about removing barriers, opening doors that have historically been too heavy for too many people to push open alone. This program was born from that conviction, and I want to take a moment to recognize the members who have brought it to life, Irina and Nanette. What you've built here is a genuine expression of what the club should be. And as a director of the club, I want to thank you for that and for helping us see what the club is becoming and needs to continue to become. Today's session is on effective communication, and I want to say something plainly before we begin. This is not a soft skill. This is not a bonus topic for scientists who happen to be comfortable on camera. Communication is the work. If you make a discovery and no one understands why it matters, it doesn't matter as much as it should. And the explorers who change the world are not just the ones who go the furthest or dig the deepest, they are the ones who can bring the rest of us along with them. Our club has always understood this. Our Monday night public lecture series, the longest running public lecture series of its kind dating back to 1922, is built on exactly this premise that knowledge shared is knowledge amplified. And the three people joining us today embody that principle in remarkable ways. Denali is doing the kind of science that genuinely shapes how we understand our planet, volcanology at the edges of tectonic plates, their relationship between melting glaciers and volcanic activity. And they're doing it with the courage to show up fully, to build a visible and inclusive community, and to put that science on screens at the BBC and in rooms at Woods Hole. That is a complete explorer. Tina is asking some of the most fundamental questions about what it means to be human, the biology of our variation, the stories written into our hair and skin. And she's doing it in a way that reaches people through Nat Geo, through NPR, through her own television series. She is a model of what it looks like to hold rigorous science and genuine public curiosity in the same hand. And Rachel Rudwell, I'll just say that there are very few people in any room who have paraglided with a hawk, dove cage-free with bull sharks, produced Emmy-nominated television, all in the service of telling stories that matter. Rachel has built a global audience because she understands something essential. Adventure is a language. If you speak it well, people will follow you anywhere. She's one of the most compelling communicators in our community. I'm genuinely proud that she is a part of this club and that she is a friend. And for those of us who are joining today, whether you're in high school, in college, navigating what comes next, I want you to hear something directly from me. You belong here. The Explorers Club is a big tent. We're actively building it bigger. Your curiosity is the credential that matters most. So, thank you for the opportunity to introduce you. And yeah, I'm going to sit back and learn.
Wow, thanks so much, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Nanette, and I'm going to provide a quick introduction to the Access program. So this is a program that has grown out of the existing mentorship program at the Explorers Club, which pairs mentors and mentees together to meet for a year. Arena and I were paired up together in this program, and over the course of the year, we would often discuss how we didn't have family or training and how to become an explorer, but we both have had amazing mentors who have helped us access the pathways that we chose to become the explorers that we are. But so often, young individuals or first-generation students from traditionally marginalized communities lack access to the resources and support necessary to pursue STEM careers or scientific exploration. And this can come from a lack of knowledge, taught, or experienced on how to navigate the path to becoming an explorer. And barriers such as financial constraints and unfamiliarity with the hidden curriculum of professional development can exacerbate this access. So the Access program is made up of three core pillars: advancing careers, creating equity, supporting success. Through mentoring, workshops, and community building, the program seeks to empower individuals who would otherwise navigate their exploration activities without guidance, and as a result, face obstacles that might deter them from pursuing a future or career in scientific exploration. By helping remove these obstacles, Access can help create a more diverse, equitable, and accessible scientific exploration community and Explorers Club. This initiative has started with a year-long 4-part virtual webinar series that features members and friends of the Explorers Club. We hope to develop this program further in the future and include other content and resources that help build community and enable access to a career in exploration. With that, thank you for attending, and Arena, take it away.
Wonderful. I'm only going to hold the mic for a hot second and then I'm going to pass on the floor since now we have a background of the Explorers Club. Thank you, Paul, for providing a background on our wonderful panelists and Annette for explaining the goals of Access. And we're going to go straight into our panel presentations. We're going to start off with Dr. Tina Lasisi. So Tina, please take it away.
Yay, awesome sauce. Well, Irina, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a spiel of how I got into science communication slash public engagement about the work. So right now, I'm an assistant professor of anthropology and ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Michigan, which is how I know Irina, who was gracious enough to guest lecture for my class. And yeah, so before that, I did my PhD in biological anthropology at Penn State. And then before that, I was an undergrad at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And I get to play elder millennial so many times in class now because I'll tell the kids that I've been working on hair evolution since 2012. And I keep thinking that 2012 wasn't that long ago. And it increasingly is longer and longer ago. And what I think is interesting to share with this group is that I have been doing some kind of public engagement relating to my research from the beginning. So when I started becoming interested in studying hair morphology and pigmentation scientifically, I needed to have people participate in my research. And to find those people, I decided to start contacting people who were famous-ish around the natural hair blogs at the time. So at the time, a lot of Black women in the UK and in the US were moving away from straightening their hair and embracing their natural hair textures. And so there was a community around this. And I reached out basically saying, hey, I want to study this stuff. Do you mind if you tell your followers and subscribers about this and what's going on? And that made it so that public engagement was immediately integrated into the work that I do. As an anthropologist, I'm really aware of the fact that this discipline doesn't have a great history of consensually involving the people that it studies in their science. So it was great to be able to do this in a completely different way, where from the beginning, you're telling people about what you're hoping to learn, and they're involved, and they're not just the object of your study, but they're co-creators of that work. And that was incredibly exciting. And so I kept chasing this little hyper focus fixation of mine to the point that now I am a professor doing this. And it's funny to think back on the fact that there is actually a lot of internet archive evidence of me stumbling around talking about the work that I'm doing. And if anything, I hope that it shows people that you do not have to wait until you are whatever the end point is allegedly of a scientist to actually communicate that. And I would say that what I want to share today is probably the perspective of what it is like to pursue a career in academia while simultaneously doing public engagement, especially as someone who is early career. So as a little bit of engagement, I'm going to read out what people say in the chat, but would folks feel comfortable sharing whether they are in grad school or in academia or in some other position? I'd love to get an idea of, who's in the crowd. And in the meantime, can we switch to the next slide? Okay, so if you guys want to share that at some point, I feel like it is important to know what is possible, but also what you might hear when you are trying to do this. If you're somebody who is interested in pursuing graduate school and then possibly finding a career in academia. So I started out with a blog because 10 years ago, that was one form of our social media. We would write these blogs. So it's kind of like Substack, but not centralized. And people are going to be reinventing blogging. And I love that for us. And what I ended up doing was just narrating the things that I was doing. So one of the things that I'm actually most proud of was talking about what it's like to actually be a graduate student who is doing comprehensive exams in graduate school. And in the same time, I would be talking about the actual research that I was doing. And that then led to me being invited to various opportunities to do podcasts like Shortwave to talk about the content of the work that I was actually doing. And ultimately, I had the opportunity after I finished my PhD to spend a year really doing pure SciComm is what I'm going to call it, instead of being funded to pursue a particular research project. I worked with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute to create content about the biology of human variation that was to be shared widely. And so that is one of the options that you have. You can talk about your own work, which is what I had a lot of experience doing. And then you can also create content that is more broad. And this is one of the things that I would recommend folks consider. A lot of times you might feel like you're not the world expert in something and therefore you can't talk about it. But you know more than a lot of the public does. And so it is truly a gift that you can give to folks to talk through a subject in a way that is going to be infinitely more understandable than the peer-reviewed papers that they're not even going to have access to because they're behind a paywall, right? So I want you to consider whether that's something that you might enjoy doing. And during that 1 year, I talked the people who were sponsoring me into letting me make TikTok videos. This was in 2022. Yeah, this was in 2021, 2022. So, a minute ago. And it ended up being a great way of being able to reach a wide audience. And this is something I want to put out there. As you've already heard from some of the earlier comments, we talk about a community. And I want you to know that especially these days when you are creating, these bits of content, when you're sharing in whatever kind of format, you end up becoming part of a community. And that is a lovely and wonderful thing. And I think it has changed the landscape such that it's not just someone who is in their ivory tower who their peers have deemed important enough to share things blasting the information unilaterally, but it is all kinds of different people having conversations. And that is what it means to share. It is to be in community with people. It is to build relationships and to ask questions. A lot of what I think is most valuable about public engagement isn't even the things that you're going to say, but it is what you're going to hear. It's what people are going to tell you. So many people have sent me DMs. I'm talking about, school teachers, people who have nothing to do with biological anthropology, asking me their questions. And it's such a privilege to be able to answer some of those for them because, after all, I think a lot of scientists would agree with me. The work that we do is for the public. It is for everyone. It is to advance everyone's knowledge. It is to advance everyone's joy, honestly. And one of the things that can happen is that you end up getting more opportunities. So we can switch to the next slide. I was lucky enough to get a message from an incredible group of people who were going to be working with PBS Digital Studios to make a web series. And so they had seen my little TikTok videos and they said, you know what, this dork, yeah, that's our kind of people. And we want her to be talking to the camera. And that gave me the opportunity to work on what I would say in my experience was the extreme other end of how much you can invest in communication, right? So from the beginning, it was, I'm just going to write a little blog post about, I want to get hair samples from people. And this is what I'm doing in school. And here are some pictures and some videos about my research. And then all the way at the other end is having the privilege of working with a group of professionals, a whole crew who you are collaborating with in order to bring a vision to life that is hopefully going to reach a lot of different people. And now that I've had this range of experiences, I would say that there is no single method that is, in my opinion, more effective than the other in terms of these different modes. They all have their way of reaching people, and they have their pros and cons in terms of how much of a time investment is going to represent and what you might want to consider is what is feasible for you. I think it can be a lot of pressure to try and plan the perfect strategy for communicating. And on the kind of sadder side, I think it can be something that takes over your life in not a good way. And a lot of folks who create content for the algorithmic beasts have experienced that, where you feel like you are just producing and producing until you exhaust yourself. And we don't want people exhausting themselves. So the most effective form of communication is going to be, the one that you can do. Don't pressure yourself too much into it being perfect. Don't feel like you need to come up with a 5-year plan for, how you're going to become the next Bill Nye. You can just share what's going on. And by virtue of doing that, you become part of this community that is going to be talking about science, and all other kinds of scholarship. So that would be my spiel, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions in the Q&A after.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tina. And with that, we're going to go on to our second panelist, Denali. So Denali, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Denali. I'm a third-year PhD candidate now. I did pass my comprehensive exam, so I'm a PhD candidate in, thank you, in volcanic geochemistry. In my undergrad, I did undergraduate research in submarine volcanology, so underwater volcanology. And I took a few years to work kind of in my industry before going for my PhD. And during that time, I spent 2 years working at the Alaska Volcano Observatory. A lot of people do not actually know this about Alaska, but we have 140 active volcanoes up there. So it's a big deal up there. And actually, a lot of our volcanologists who work at the Alaska Volcano Observatory get sent to all the other volcanic locations like Hawaii for their volcanic responses because we get 2 to 3 eruptions per year up there. It's just nobody really knows what goes on up there except us, so they don't really make the news. But I also worked as a deep sea geologic contractor during my time at AVO. So essentially, every now and then, I'd get a call that they needed a deep sea geologic contractor, and I would go and live on a boat for 6 weeks collecting ocean floor rocks before coming back to Alaska to look at Alaska volcanic rocks. So I thought it was a pretty good gig, and I really enjoyed it. And in order to have a long-term career in volcanology, there really are no volcanology jobs that don't require a PhD. The only real jobs in volcanology are research jobs, and I was able to get a lab tech position at the Volcano Observatory. But in order to get those higher up positions, you really have to get a PhD. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll talk about what I actually research. Yep. So my actual PhD research is I research melt supply, so the amount of molten material from deep within the earth at mid-ocean ridges, and kind of that entire process of how it gets from deep within the mantle to actually erupting at the surface and what impacts those processes. And I have 2 primary study locations. One is Iceland, and one is the East Pacific Rise, which is a mid-ocean ridge. And you essentially have 2 tectonic plates diverging apart, and the molten material from the mantle comes up between the plates as they spread apart and causes volcanism. And at most of these mid-ocean ridge locations, they're at the bottom of the ocean. So for the most part, they don't impact us on the immediate scale. They do impact how our planet forms. But Iceland is a unique case where you have 2 tectonic plates diverging apart and a hotspot, which is a superheated plume of mantle material that comes up to the surface. And because we have those 2 very unique situations in one location, that's the only place in the world where a mid-ocean ridge is what we call subaerial, which is the convoluted scientist way to say it's above the water, right? So those are my 2 study locations, and the kind of questions that I'm trying to answer theoretically at some point during my PhD is how does deglaciation impact volcanism? So when you have a lot of pressure on top of a volcanic system and you decrease that pressure over time, that can actually cause more melt to be produced. And oftentimes melting is associated just with an increase in temperature, but that's because melting is at the surface and that's relatively all the same pressure. But once we go deep into the center of the earth, pressure becomes a much bigger deal. So as you reduce that pressure, it actually causes more melt to be produced and volcanism to increase. It can be as much as 100 times higher following mass deglaciation periods, which a lot of regions are currently undergoing as the planet warms. So on a very long-term scale, this has a pretty important volcanic hazards application to see how climate change over time is going to impact volcanic activity. And then those other 2 questions are kind of just related to comparing Iceland to regular mid-ocean ridge volcanoes. You do have pressure changes at deep sea volcanoes as well with sea level change, and kind of comparing how these 2 similar but distinct systems interact over time. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I got started in science communication when I was in undergrad. So this is about 2020. And my account originally had nothing to do with geology whatsoever. It was just a regular social media account. It was during COVID, so no one was really talking to each other in person. And I wanted a way to kind of build community. I was a late transfer to geology. I transferred from biomedical sciences and actually spent a year in nursing school before deciding I didn't want to do that and changed to geology. But since I hadn't really met anyone at my new school, my primary way of building community was social media. And I had one video completely not related to rocks whatsoever go viral. And suddenly I had an audience and I was like, I like rocks. Maybe all of these people following me might like rocks too. And so I started making geology content. And so my primary method of science communication is social media, but I'm pretty big on all kinds of science communication. I do a lot of public presentations and lectures, and I'm very involved in doing lectures to like K through 12. I especially love doing presentations to elementary kids because there's not a lot of states don't actually require any geology education in K through 12, and I like to kind of get them while they're young and show them how great rocks are. And you get to kind of tailor the activities to each audience and really connect with them on a personal level. My media work, I really love my in-person outreach, but I do think that the social media work has the widest possible audience and probably has the greatest impact. And I'm kind of self-conscious about sometimes bringing this up in a large scientist community because it's not always fun to hear, but I plan on spending my whole life as a researcher and working in academia because I love it, but I also genuinely feel that my social media work is going to have a much larger impact on society than my actual research, which you don't always want to hear if you're a researcher. But it's by far the most accessible way to learn. It has the widest reach, and for all the same reasons that, Tina already brought up, traditional communication is not very accessible, both because of the literal cost. You have to pay money often to read these articles, and also because the longer you spend in academia, the more you forget how to talk to normal people. Uh, when I was working at the Volcano Observatory, I was making videos about the volcanoes that were in Alaska. And the Volcano Observatory puts out a public notice every week about each of our volcanoes. And it is a public notice meant to be for the public. But as I was making these videos, I make a habit to always refer people to the actual researchers for further information or for any actively erupting volcanic systems. I don't want anyone coming to my TikTok page when there's a volcano erupting outside and being like, what do I do? I don't want the responsibility. So I always refer people to the actual source, and I would refer people to these notices. But I started getting hundreds of comments being like, well, I looked at the notice and I don't understand what it says. And these are written supposedly for the public. And I went and I actually looked at them in more detail myself. And I copy and pasted one of them into an online app called Hemingway, which I don't know if anyone's heard of, but you can copy and paste something you've written into it, and it'll tell you the reading level that it's written for. Every single one of those public-facing notices was written for a college degree level, and a vast majority of people who are accessing these notices, especially where I'm from in Alaska, do not have that, and that's who it's most applicable to. And so that was actually something I worked on while I was there. Is they're not used to having that kind of direct feedback from the public. It's easier for people to comment on a video than to find someone to email at the USGS, right? So that was something they worked on evolving while I was there, is they didn't realize, because to them, this is such an easy, simply written thing, but that's because they've spent 30 years working in volcanology. So I think it serves as a really important in between for the researchers and the actual public. It's also it has a huge variety in format. You can do the really short, less than 3 minute long ones, and then there's YouTube videos that can, of course, get up to an hour long. And over the past 2 years or so, I've gotten more involved in like documentary work. So I did a short film for the BBC. I'm currently working with some people at PBS to eventually do a documentary related theoretically to Yellowstone. But it's years away. It's evolving. So not sure what the final product will look like. And another thing that I think is pretty neat about the world of social media science communication is, in my experience, I've often felt like I've been pulled or pushed to pick one, like these are two completely distinct careers. And I understand how people get that impression, but for me personally, they are inextricably linked with each other. My research inspires my communication, and at this point, the account is large enough that actually part of my PhD is being funded by my science communication work. Like my internship this summer is a science communication internship with SciShow, which is Hank's Green YouTube show. And so half of that money covers my stipend, and the other half is a research grant that goes towards my research. So in the world of funding right now, there's also a lot to be said for this opens up a whole new avenue. And my Iceland chapters that I'm doing have a more direct volcanic hazards application. But a lot of my deep sea research, let's be honest, a lot of that is finding knowledge for the sake of just wanting to know, which obviously we as researchers really love, but the public is funding that. They have a right to be taught about it. And so I think increasing the back and forth and linking the worlds of science communication and the actual research more, the more we can do of that, the better it's going to be for both communities instead of treating them like they're separate entities. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, Denali. And last but certainly not least, we're going to pass over the mic to Rachel Rudwall. So Rachel, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you to Tina and Denali for leading the charge. There's something that everyone has said so far, which is that operating in a silo is less effective than operating in and sharing with community. If you take one thing away, it is don't operate in a silo. Invite people in. Invite them to care about what you care about. And people can't care unless they know about it in the first place. So invite them in, extend the invitation. Each of the people who spoke before me does this beautifully and powerfully. Another cool thing that I heard the other two speakers share is kind of this idea that if you build it, they will come. So just because you don't see something out there in the world yet, a style of communication, an Instagram dedicated to rocks, whatever it is that fires you up, if you build it, they will come. If you build it, people will start reaching out and saying, I love rocks. I want to make a show about rocks. Let's make a show about rocks together, whatever that looks like. So briefly, a bit of background on me. I am from the Midwest originally, and I was a kid who, in fact, I loved sticks. The first thing I said to my family when I moved to a new house when I turned 3, I sprinted up the driveway and was like, look, Daddy, sticks. And my love of the natural world continues to this day, which brings me to the Explorers Club. But I was so excited to learn that there was a world beyond Ohio that I went to college for international relations. I studied every foreign language I could. I got an international studies and a Spanish degree. I did multiple study abroads. I was like, get me out of here. And I thought I would go into diplomacy. That was all that I knew about as a possible pathway to explore the world and hopefully do some good along the way. And long story long, I found storytelling as essentially an everyday diplomacy. I got this internship between junior and senior years of college for a travel company producing multimedia assets from 16 countries over the course of one summer, all with the goal of inspiring other people to travel. This for me was a total dream job, and it absolutely parlayed the things I love, which were academic and learning based, into this path, which I'm on now professionally, and I have been for almost 20 years. So elder millennials represent. The thing that I want to do more than anything today is invite you into your own superpowers as storytellers and as communicators. Because whether or not you realize it, every single conversation you're having, you're sort of switching between various audiences and hopefully trying to meet people where they are and get your point across and share with them what is valuable to you. So, in all of my travels, people have asked me numerous very specific questions. One is, what's the most important piece of gear that you have? You've been to 7 continents, you've worked in 80 countries. What's your favorite piece of gear? For me, the best tool that I have is my capacity to translate lived experience and a feeling of wonder into something that invites people along with me. That's a tool everybody has, the power to extend that invitation. And the beauty of the research and the work that each of you is doing right now or interested in doing is that it can change the world. But like Paul Tanguy said at the beginning of this, unless people know about it, it does not impact as many people as it could. So you have what essentially becomes not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to share what it is that fuels you with other people. So let's talk toolkit. You have a couple superpowers already. You have access, hopefully, to cool learnings, interesting discoveries. And you also have a set of tools around you every day. People will frequently be like, what's your favorite camera? Like, is it so expensive? I've worked with all kinds of amazing gear, drones, handheld cameras, steady cams, you name it. I can talk all day about what the variations on a theme are, but my favorite camera is the one I have with me. Because if I'm somewhere and something happens and I think, wow, what a special, magical moment, I'd like to capture that. And all I have is my smartphone. You know what camera I'm going to use? I'm going to use my smartphone. It's an incredible tool that if you have in your pocket, you've already got the beginnings of a kit. You can have a more expensive camera. There are DSLRs, which have lenses. There are mirrorless cameras, which are lighter weight and often a bit more rugged because they have fewer moving parts. And so you can go out into the wild with them. They're sometimes waterproof. There are drones. Be careful if you bring a drone anywhere with you. There are regulations that vary location to location. You don't want to confiscate it at the airport. But the unsung hero, that being the smartphone, is perfect for the in the moment immersive content that you can capture anywhere at any time. It allows for authenticity and accessibility. People are less likely to clam up if you're recording them with a smartphone because they've seen them. They've talked to them before. They've talked to their relatives on FaceTime. Maybe they like to live stream whatever it is that they're into. So it's more grounded and people are less likely to kind of shut down if they're with you on camera. You also have things like sensory capturing where you can actually get really cool immersive content through things like these little itty bitty microphones, little lavalier mics, lav mics, which are the kind you just clip onto clothing. They can be wireless or wired. And when you have something like that with you in your field kit, you can get excellent sound. You can get, it cuts down on wind. It cuts down on ambient noise. It lends a real crispness that automatically ups the value of your content. You can also use your phone for voice memos. So you want to get that calving glacier or the roaring wind or the sound of a bustling market, use a voice memo. Not only will that help you relive it someday when you're 97 sitting in an armchair somewhere, you can incorporate that into your content. It can be an audio bed for anything that you decide to cut in the form of a video or even as a backdrop to a photo slideshow. There are note-taking apps that can help you log those fleeting textures or those incredible quotes from experts in the field before the sort of memory tax fades them. Day One is a journaling app. Otter AI helps you transcribe voice memos. And if you're looking to be super polished, there are even teleprompter apps that will scroll text for you if you have really specific scientific text that you need to follow along while you are self-recording. So your super tool, you probably have. One pro tip, if you're recording anything really, including with your phone, use your body as the tripod or the monopod. What is a pod with two? A duopod. Depends on how many limbs you're using, I suppose. But use yourself as the way to zoom. Because that little 1x, meaning it's just on normal, and you hit the 2x and it pushes in and zooms for you, and then a 3x, you're losing resolution that you can never get back. If you have the capacity to move closer to a subject, it not only brings motion that invites the viewer in, but also means you're not losing image quality. So something to consider. So you can also, when you've taken photos or videos or voice notes or what have you, you can do editing right on your phone. There are paid apps, but there are also free apps. I know those of you who are students, you're on budgets. Heard. I'm still on a budget. So you can use Lightroom or Photoshop. You can use Snapseed. Those are for photography. For video, there's CapCut. It has pre-existing templates that you can cut your content within and push to social media and engage people there. You can use clips. You can use Instagram's Edits app. These are all things that I've used myself because I do have a lot of content out there on social media. In the spirit of build it and they will come, nobody was hiring women to be experts in anything except for interior design and baking. And I'm not known for those skills. So I built my own action adventure channels, and that's how I landed my first TV shows. So we can click to the next slide. Thank you so much. So the alchemy of story. How do you bring it together? This is some of my social content where I was invited to shoot with NASA last year. I just got back from Greenland. Spoiler alert, here's how I lost 10 pounds in Italy. I didn't. It's just a montage of all the food that's good in Italy. Tricked you. So the way that you bring it all together, the way that you translate that lived experience of those, shaky phone clips and the moments in the sweaty jungle where you hear the crickets on the voice note, you bring it together with a few key narrative tactics. It's not just the equipment that you're using. One thing to remember above all else is every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And so does every shot. What I mean by that is you don't just want to start in the middle and assume your audience is there with you. You want to build it up, invite people in, put them first by telling the full story. When I say telling the full story, that doesn't mean include more, talk longer. It means make it succinct, start somewhere clear, ramp it up however you choose to, and then put a bow on it at the end. And when I say every shot has a beginning, middle, and an end, I mean you can pan left to right or right to left. You can push in physically and pull back out. It gives you a lot more to play with when you're editing as well. So it's not just like, here I am on a horse. Here I am on another horse. Look, it is a horse again. Include that audio that's going to transport people to the moment. Right? Incorporating sound bites from the field or sound from the field really adds depth and color, and it makes people feel as if they're there with you as opposed to at home on the couch, And above all else, put your audience first. Don't assume they know anything. This is one way to put them first. Don't assume they know anything. This is not the same as assuming that they're stupid. Okay? It's just not making assumptions that they are as equipped and smart as you are. It's like the Hemingway app that was referenced earlier. Don't assume everybody can read at a collegiate level, right? So you don't want to be like, as everyone already knows, the sky is blue because. If you do that, there will be people who will feel dumb and uninvited because they didn't know that. So while you may be the expert, it is your job to make things relatable. Be honest, be human, be relatable. People are into that. It's not about perfection. It's not about knowing everything. It's about sharing the moment. So don't talk down to people and tell a great story. Part of telling a great story is getting out of our own heads. Sometimes we get into our heads about what we think we want to say, and then we'll just talk and talk. Don't do that. Speak from here if you can. Let us see how stoked you are about those rocks, Denali. You know what I mean? Like, if you're like, rocks are these things that I know to be true because facts, that's really different than like, look at this one that I found. You can share the facts in that context, in the context of that conversation. And perhaps most importantly, it is not about you. Whoever you are and whoever you become, you may be the preeminent expert in your field. And that is rad. And you will have worked really hard for that. But it's not about you. It's about the audience, right? Because why do what you're doing if you're going to act like you're cooler than they are, get in your own head, and then lose them because they scroll past. They go, oh, that person wasn't thinking about me. They were just thinking about their hair. They were just thinking about how cool they looked in the field. Put them first by making it fun. Get out of your own way. I finally, one last thing, want to speak to the ethics of storytelling. So how you can document with dignity and respect and reciprocity. A couple of quick takeaways. There's kind of a human first rule that you should keep in mind. You should never let the shot or the story be at the expense of a person or people and that human connection. So there's sort of this idea that there should always be a handshake before you pull out your camera. Handshake being a human moment, a shared connection, not you taking something from somebody without their permission and being like, ooh, they look this specific way that I'm going to document. So share a moment and then ask permission. And if someone says no or gestures no, move on. It's their right to choose to be a part of this story or not. And in the spirit of reciprocity, share. Make it a two-way street. Send them the photo via WhatsApp or AirDrop. Email an image to them later. And make sure that you're asking yourself, in the end, whatever story I'm trying to tell, does this story make the subject look like a hero, a victim, or a human being? Always aim for human being. And avoid poverty tourism. There are a lot of different sort of tropes that we've all become aware of in recent years, I think, that are more inclined to strip people of their agency than to highlight them as the center of their own stories and the people, the human beings that they are. Where that's concerned, context is king. So make sure that your notes, whatever captions you're posting, provide that important context and why this moment might have been important to the subject and not just to you. And keep an eye out for ways that you can protect the vulnerable. So whether that's through sharing of fragile ecosystems, where people might sort of be then tromping along and not aware it's a fragile ecosystem, or identifying information that could put any group of people at risk. So these are things to keep in mind. I didn't even thank you for advancing forward. In each of these photos, Felix, that you clicked to, you'll see a mom and her grandbaby in a tent in the Sahara. You see me with an elephant. These are prime examples of I'm there on assignment. I have the proper permissions, and am very fortunate as a result. Last slide, please. And I know I'm out of time. The time to share what you love is now. It is always now. So do the thing that made you as a little kid stoked, if possible, in the way that only you can now as an adult who's excited to pursue knowledge. That's me in the Galapagos with a sea lion pup, and that's me in a hot air balloon as a child. And it turns out I make the same face now when I'm excited. So I hope that you can find what lights you up and share it with people in only the way that you can. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, Tina and Denali, for sharing your experiences. I had a question to kind of get the Q&A started that I had already shared with you, and you see it on the screen in front of you. But you are all so good at communicating that you have already answered this question in your presentations. So I don't want to re-ask the same question, but instead I thought we could just maybe talk a little bit about one of the key themes I saw in the pre-submitted questions from our attendees. We asked folks to send questions in the RSVP. And the key theme I saw in a lot of the questions is, okay, how do I actually do this? And there was a concern specifically in regards to how do I get technical, difficult to access content, theory, concepts? How do I make the normal person be able to understand this? That's really key, I think, as we've heard over and over again in the conversations of like, how do we do this? So how do you do this? How do you approach getting from the technical to the accessible? This is open to all of you.
The approach that I personally take is I have literally practiced video subjects to my 6-year-old niece. Um, you might not have a 6-year-old niece handy to talk about your work to, but I switching to geology so late in my undergrad, I remember it feeling very much like jumping into the deep end. And I, being in academia this long, I do feel like it's a completely different language. I'll sometimes read papers on my own specialty and be like, I don't know what this is saying, and this is my specialty and on the volcanic system that I literally study. So I will sometimes go through a sentence in a paper, literally word by word, and say what is the simplest possible way that I could say this. And if you want to take kind of a technical, like parsing out approach to that, um, try and replace it with as short and as few words as possible. That's kind of like the more direct technical answer to the question. And as far some people often ask me like, how do you get started? And I think that there's this idea that you have to have everything perfect in order to post it, but there's so many things you can't learn until you just post it. And I personally felt like starting in undergrad, it was an amazing learning experience because those kind of skills you often don't get taught like in a STEM program, like actually talking to people. And the more you make the videos, the more feedback you'll get about like, oh, I didn't understand this XYZ part. So that will give you more insight as to your own unawareness of like what you're communicating. And the more practice you get at it, the better you'll get at communicating it as well.
I'm reminded of this incredible book by an author named Randall Munroe called Thing Explainer, which if you haven't heard of it, the description, I have this book at home, but the description of it that you will find online is it's a book that explains complex topics like the International Space Station, tectonic plates, and the periodic table using only the 1,000 most common English words and simple line drawings. It's a great example of really bringing it down and being like, here are the basics. And I think Denali did a great job of bringing the notion that communicating to a 6-year-old is a great space to practice. I have a 4-year-old, and I spend a lot of time answering why, what's this? And it is, in fact, a good way to practice not being up here with language when you can just be where all the rest of us are.
And not to continually plug the Hemingway app, but if you write scripts, you can plug your script into the app and it'll tell you what level your script is at. So there are those kind of more like on the technical side of things, tools to help you look at what your own like patterns are.
To give a bit of a different perspective, now that I have been teaching for about 2 years, I have a different perspective on what it means to explain something, namely that you will never have explained the thing, right? One of the things that you want to take off your shoulders is this idea that you will give the final explanation, the most explainy explainer that will ever explain a thing. Nah, you're not going to do that. And make peace with that. The value of what you are communicating is not in, oh my God, is every single person who's going to watch this going to understand it? No. Like you're going to be explaining it in one language probably, and that will be inaccessible to someone else. You will probably explain things in a way that maybe 3 years from now we find out that the mechanism underlying that is completely different. And being an anthropologist, Irina and I are in the same department. I can promise you that the Venn diagram between the specialist terms that we know is probably really, really, really thin because anthropology is such an interdisciplinary subject. So in terms of how do I explain very, very complex things, you are not going to exhaustively explain something. And that's okay. But you can share a cool thing about something in a particular context. Whether you are giving a lecture, whether you are making a 60-second video, very different thing, whether you are writing a blog post or writing a longer article, those are all going to be different arenas for communicating different things. And I think that there is, in fact, a joy and a liberation in understanding that you will never be done with the thing that you are talking about. Like, even if it's, I know nothing about rocks. I like how me and Rachel are like, okay, rocks is the thing I can remember. I'm sure that you could pick a rock flavor and you could talk about that rock flavor for 1,000 days and find 1,000 different things to say about it. And that is really cool. So keep front of mind that there is no pressure, right? And if you are already doing the due diligence of thinking about, hey, how do I explain this and how do I make it accessible? Then that effort in and of itself is valid. And you will do it over and over again, and it will get better. And each one of those attempts will have had value.
Tangential but related topic is I feel like knowing what kind of topics are are what you will find interesting versus what the audience find interesting is very different. And that's not to say that you shouldn't talk about what you're passionate about, but like I'm a geochemist, no one wants to see my plots but me. No, like I might make a video about the meaning of the plots that people might care about. But it's an important skill to kind of learn what is something that you can make understandable, approaching and approachable to the audience versus maybe what is a little bit too far out there. And I personally try and focus on like what are the things about geology that inspired me to get into it in the first place. Those kind of topics are something that I try really hard to approach in my research when there's all that other stuff that I'm just never going to be able to properly explain in a minute and 30 seconds.
I love that. And it reminds me that actually, Irina, your initial question has this secondary half, which is when did was there a moment when your career changed, when storytelling changed for you? And I forget the exact phrasing, but related to what everyone here is saying, and particularly Denali, I'm reminded of this moment where I was doing training to become an on-camera host because believe it or not, is harder than it looks. Like where to hold the mic when the wind is blowing quickly towards you. What do you do when you're on a red carpet versus in the field? All that stuff. Um, and I wanted to work in content that was of particularly serious subject matter. And the person who was my manager at the time was like, "You're too serious. Like, quit being so serious. I don't want to watch this." And I was like, "It's a serious topic. What am I supposed to do?" And he was like, "Not that. You're being much too sort of like," it was this foreboding sort of the world is a serious place. I have to imagine that's how I came across. And I learned very begrudgingly that just because a subject is a serious subject doesn't mean that we have to treat it like homework. We don't want people to come home and feel like we're giving them homework when in fact what we're hoping to do is share what we love, right? So making it fun, even if it is meaningful or serious of gravity, that's a really cool challenge that will take an entire lifetime to continue practicing because people want to take a load off. There's a lot going on in the world at all times. And now that we're plugged in more than ever, we will forever feel like everything wants our attention. So, how do we get people's attention? How do we make it fun for them to learn and be excited about the planet in which we all coexist? Don't take it or yourself quite so seriously. Take it from me. Doesn't work.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing those perspectives. And I really like your point, Rachel, about keeping it light and keeping it fun. And I think that takes away some of the pressure also that has already been mentioned of just start, build it and they will come, have fun with it. Some things will land, some things won't. But that's kind of part of the process. I did notice that there was a Q&A actually already in the chat. And this one is one first for Tina, and they're asking if you could talk a little bit more about your blog experiencing or your blog experience as a graduate student. So what are some of the practicabilities and challenges and successes? And as someone who used to have a blog, I too would love to know more about that.
That makes me so happy. The shared I too carry hot sauce in my bag swag of the shared blog. That warms my heart. I feel like the blog is coming back, honestly, guys. So there's two aspects to that question. One is running a blog, and then the second aspect as a graduate student. So I'm gonna speak to the blog part, but then I'm gonna expand to how I'm going to interpret this question, which is how do you communication when communication is in fact not your job? It is not the main thing that you are either being paid to do or paying to do, whichever flavor of grass you're doing. So first, blog wise, it took me more time, and this is across any medium. You may have read a blog. You may have watched a video. That is not the same as making those things. The time that it takes to consume dozens of these doesn't even compare to how much effort goes into a single one of them. So the first part is it takes time, and that is going to be the main thing you have to keep in mind. So in general, something I wanted to put out there, because a lot of folks shared cool stuff that they're doing. They're high school students here, so shout out to y'all for being on this so early. There are people, doing mass communication, product management, all kinds of backgrounds in here. You have 24 hours in a day. One of the podcasts I listened to, Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work, says this thing that has traumatized me, and I feel like I'm entitled to compensation. Days are short and life is long, and I find that horrific. I find that awful. I'm not saying I wish it was the other way around, but I personally want to do so many things that I feel like I would do better in a place where I could just do more things in a day. And with that limitation, my advice, practical advice, is approach things in batches and seasons. Something that really burned me out, and I shared, my TikTok page from I don't know how long ago. I haven't posted in 3 years exactly now. It's been 3 years since I've posted anything because the entire experience burned me out so much. And I knew that when I started getting a lot of content, targeted towards me about here's how you get more followers and post every day and like and follow, but as it is over, because at that point it had become accidentally becoming a marketer. And what for, right? Something I have to say begrudgingly is that there was some truth in some of the things certain colleagues said, where it was along the lines of, it's great to communicate, but you have to have something to communicate about. And depending on, what your relationship is, right? This is completely different to what I did while I was, working with PBS, where we were all making scripts together. But if you are sharing about the work that you are doing, you must have time to do that work. And I just could not hack it. I couldn't do everything all at once. There are definitely situations that I am in right now, even though I got lucky and have a position as a professor, where I could have been more productive and therefore had more career capital if I hadn't done those things. Now, I don't regret it, but I do want you to know that, as a graduate student, not only will you have to manage your time in this sense, but you will have to defend your actions. So in as far as it is great, and some people will say that they appreciate what you are sharing, you will definitely have mentors who are telling you that you are wasting your time and that you shouldn't be doing that. And the sad thing that I have to say is, while I disagree that it's a waste of time, it is true that there's a cost. And so you have to be realistic about what that cost is and how you see your life. I think that people will give you advice and you just don't take it at face value. There can be value in something that someone is saying, even if you're not interpreting it the way that they're sending it. So while those colleagues were saying, hey, this is a waste of time, you should be doing this instead, and then one day you can do that, that's not true. But the deeper point was, you have a limited amount of time and you will have to accrue career capital in whatever your field is. And so the result is then, I think about what third options are. Don't ignore limitations that people are pointing out to you, or criticisms or concerns, but don't assume that because they can't find a solution doesn't exist, right? So in terms of those, challenges and successes, like that's kind of like, the dark side of it. But the successes are, I genuinely do not think I would have this job if I had not done the science communication that I did. Irina, I don't know how long you've been in the program, but I feel like 500 million years ago, Paloma invited me to do a talk, and I feel like people had seen some of my stuff, and that's why I got invited to do a talk. Nods of approval. So there you
Also,
go.
you're an amazing scientist. Just want to
Thank
throw
you.
that out there.
Thank you. And another thing to think about is, it takes forever to publish a peer-reviewed article, even under the best of circumstances. And there's reasons why people don't do it, but to make yourself known and to say, hey, here are the things that I'm doing, is quite useful, can be quite useful for your career, depending on how you handle that. So, without wanting to go on too long, that's my general advice, and I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Denali, do you want to go ahead and
If
jump
it's
in?
okay, I'd like
Yeah,
to
of course.
piggyback as a current graduate student. I don't think making the volume of content I currently make would be possible had I not found a way to have some semesters where my TA-ship is replaced by science communication work. And it's very unusual to find science communication jobs that will offer a sufficient amount of funding for that. And it's also somewhat unusual to have advisors that are supportive of that because some of them have very strict traditional ideas of where you should be getting funding from. So I'm lucky that I have a relatively flexible advisor, and as long as I can come to her and say, and look, this isn't going to take any more time away from my paper than a TA-ship is, then I'm able to do that. But it's not necessarily something you can bank on going into grad school. So you're weighing the pros and cons of that risk. And even in the semesters where I'm trying to make some content and I'm also doing the TA-ship and the research, I'm very protective over what kind of content I make. And I do not make any content that doesn't feel like a hobby. Like other people go home and they're watching TV, and I'm excited to go home and make a video. Even if there are videos and topics that would be really great education-wise to make a video about, if it's not going to fill my cup as well as produce content, I simply can't afford to be making that content in a PhD program. And that's not the way that I approached it before a PhD. But if it feels like more work, it's not sustainable through a PhD, which I feel like is kind of evident if you look at who is making a large volume of content, because it's simply not sustainable to make a large volume of content that you don't enjoy making or feel that it is your own personal hobby while in a PhD program. Everyone I know who does full-time science communication is no longer working in research, and every full-time researcher I know who went into a PhD program and made content before no longer makes it. So you have to be very strict about what kind of content you make, and even if you do that at a certain point, it may be unsustainable unless you are able to monetize it to the degree that it funds your research, which is very unusual. So
Yeah, thank you for like sharing that perspective because I think as someone who's more of a consumer, it's really easy to see the content and not realize how much time goes into like you were mentioning, Tina, that like you read a blog in 20 minutes, it actually takes like 7 days or more to write it. So it's really important to see just like the amount of time and labor that goes into creating this content. Just something to keep in mind. I was actually the social media GSRA in my department. That was literally my full-time job. And it took a lot, a lot of my hours, so much so that that was the only thing I focused on those semesters. So that is entirely relatable. Rachel, did you want to hop on and add anything in regards to this question? No pressure, if not.
I had years where my entire income was to be a social media content creator. And yeah, my entire income was that because my entire timeline was devoted to that. And so I could make a career of it. But it first took juggling the years where I was producing and shooting TV shows in places like Alaska. I would be producing and shooting in the field. I would come back, I'd be in the edit bay for a show for Nat Geo or Discovery or History, and then I'd go home and I'd produce a YouTube video. And I would do a video a week with a co-producer, and it was like full grind. And as soon as I was contacted to host a show and to start doing this work full time, I could no longer be dedicating as much of myself to producing other people's projects. So it's totally in alignment with what you're hearing here. It's not, it has to be an either or, but it's enough of a grind that you take your 24 hours of the day and you say, okay, what can I honestly dedicate to each? And what's worthy of my yes, knowing that there are multiple things that I'm aiming to dedicate myself to.
I just want to quickly dive in with a related rant/systemic observation, but haven't been on the internet as long as I have, it's for the kids. We are bloated with content. And it's so sad because you hear all of these wonderful people who want to make excellent content, but it feels like if you stop for even a week, let alone a month, let alone 3 years, it's the end of the world. It's over. There's no point. You might as well not have started. While if you look at the ecosystem, we're having to do all kinds of weird tricks to get people's attention and social media strategies that are constantly having to figure out what the algorithms are doing because there's too much content. And so if I had, magical powers, what I would love is if more people created less content. And I think that that is what we are going to be moving towards, right? I think this is something that we're seeing across many different mediums. Even my prediction is peer-reviewed scientific articles. Because of this push of produce more, produce more, produce more, because the quantity of what you do is a proxy for how good you are. We are now bloated beyond recognition, beyond the point that we can read or consume any of this media, which is, not to steal your question, Denali, but the second question that was put to you is the AI context. And there are a lot of what I will happily call bad actors who are gamifying this in a way to monetize attention and basically creating content that is then going to drown out a lot of what is happening. And I think that the only possible response is that there's going to be a massive contraction in the amount of content that is going to be consumed and created. And I think that this even more so should drive us to be, like Denali, conscientious and thoughtful about, well, what do we want to produce? And to then also act as community members. Because it is very possible to just, produce, and then not be a good community member who is looking at the other content and engaging. And I'm hopeful that, however it happens, we will move more towards that as a society, because I think that this is going to be just better for everyone. And, part of the things that I'm doing is trying to unlearn wherever it came from, this idea of, oh, well, I'm not going to, I watch a lot of YouTube now, follow a YouTube creator who posts maybe once a year or twice a year. I actually do follow those people now. I'm like, you know what I love about this Marcus Werner, I don't know if anyone watches his stuff, is that my Danish homie here, he's going to post some banger stuff, who knows when. And that is going to be a great day when I get that notification. And so, let's encourage each other to do things that fill our cup and to, take on what we can and to let more people into this space.
Thank you.
Relatedly, but on one of the questions, thanks, Irina, where you're essentially talking about sort of more space at the table, collaboration, community, things like that. Elena asked in the chat, how do you collab with other storytellers? I'm sure each person in this group has different ways of going about that. But I think that first and foremost, it ties back to this idea of being in community and having relationships with other people, supporting their work, building your own arsenal. It doesn't have to be a full-time thing, but put yourself out there, start putting things out there that resonate with you. And I put this in the chat, but a phrase I remind myself of often is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I heard an even better version the other day. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of done. Just do it, okay? Doesn't have to be perfect. So put some content out there, but build relationships with people as well along the way, so that A, it doesn't feel like you're screaming into the void, but B, it's not a one-way street where you're asking somebody for something. Hey, I really would love to collaborate with you, but then you don't have anything on your own channels and you've never commented on their stuff. And in fact, it's the very first message you've ever sent them and you're still not following their channel. It's sort of like, well, what are the odds that they will not say yes? Higher if you haven't put your own effort in to either helping to tell related stories visibly or engaging with their content and building that community and that relationship. So a great way to collaborate is to be in community, whatever that ends up looking like for you. And it can take the form of being interviewed for someone's podcast, someone's blog, someone's Substack, whatever it is like accepting invitations that come to you, even if they're not ones that you expected or would normally seek out. That can work too, because then it's all practice at becoming your best communicator and being in community.
To kind of go backtrack to the AI question, but I think it kind of works everything is connected. I think it kind of works with Rachel's answer as well. So the direct question was, to what extent is increasing AI content impacting your social media presence and ability to communicate? The short answer to that, and I'll give a long one as well, but the short answer to that is that I try very hard not to let it impact the way I show up, because there's nothing I can do about it. And I can't possibly generate the same volume of content that they can with AI. I'm going to use Yellowstone volcano as an example, which anyone who's even remotely familiar with my content, I make a lot of content about Yellowstone supervolcano. Long story short, without giving you a repeat of the entire series I made on it, most everything you've ever heard about Yellowstone supervolcano is inaccurate, and not based on good science for a lot of different reasons that I articulate much more clearly in the very long years, a long time I've been making content about it. But it's a very popular topic for AI videos. And the only extent that it impacts how I show up is, I think that there were a few years where I stopped making content about Yellowstone because the fact that it is so pervasive in pop culture now, and there was so much AI content coming out about it, I felt like it impacted my ability to be a good communicator, because the topic makes me kind of angry. Not that people don't understand, because that's not their fault, but as someone who grew up in a volcanic region, I think a lot of people have this impression that volcanology is just kind of fun to know. But this misinformation has real tangible impacts on people who live in those regions, because they tend to apply what they learn about Yellowstone to other volcanic systems and things like that. And it causes a lot of unnecessary fear in like real people's lives, like who I know in person. And so now I only make content about Yellowstone once a year on the anniversary of when the park opens. But the thing is, and this I feel like kind of echoes what Tina said, where sometimes less is more if it's better quality, and also if you personally are able to show up better in that content. I used to have to really struggle to get my videos about Yellowstone to get maybe like 20K views, and this is the second year now that I have only talked about Yellowstone that one time during once a year, and people are really craving authentic non-AI content, even though there's so much of it. And so because I am coming at it from a relative place of authority, like there's a Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, I worked with those scientists quite closely, and I now take enough time off of Yellowstone to talk about it effectively. Almost at least half of the videos I've made on Yellowstone this year have over 1 million views, and I couldn't touch that kind of view count when I was making content about it every week, and frankly looking more and more pissed off every time. So I have not I have not let it affect how I show up in my content, other than I want to make sure that when I make content about it, it's really good quality, and it's able to reach people in an effective way, which you can't necessarily do if you're sounding mad at everyone. So.
That's incredibly valid. And again, as someone that's more on the consuming end, I can say that when I do see like this kind of bloated AI content, personally, I am like, okay, next. Because I think what most people crave is that human perspective. And it doesn't matter if it's raw, it doesn't matter if it's perfect, it doesn't matter if it's the most important thing is the human authenticity. So I do want to bring a note. We are kind of running up on time. We have about 10 more minutes. If somebody else has a question that they would love to ask, now is the time. So just going to give folks a second, because I think we've answered all of the questions in the chat very effectively. So if somebody else has a question, now would be the time to type it in. We're just going to wait a second to let those questions percolate. But in the meantime, I just want to say that this has been such an incredibly enlightening webinar just to sit in on and listen to. It just kind of reminds me of just the importance, again, of sharing what we're doing. But in order to do that effectively, like also tapping into like the joy that drives us to pursue the thing in the first place, so that we're able to kind of show up authentically and create the content and make it engaging and accessible. Your point about filling your cup, Denali, was really, really important, because I think if you're in a kind of system where you're trying to force yourself to produce, it just doesn't feel right, and it's draining. And when you're balancing all of these things, work, school, life, and then content creation, it can become quite a bit. Let's see. Oh, there's a question. I know that the rest of the folks can't see it, but I can. So let me just read it out loud. Let me pull it up. The question is, how do we become a part of Access? And how do we partner with these storytellers on this panel? To become a part of Access, we are figuring that out. So this is actually Nanette and I's pilot year to figure out what we can do with Access. So actually, one of the things that you can do is to provide feedback for us. In one of the last slides, we have an exit survey for folks just to tell us how you thought the webinar went, if you have any feedback for topics, ideas. And in terms of collabs, I guess I would leave that up to the panelists, but I think just to reiterate, when there is someone you want to work with, anyone, be a good community member, interact and reach out and see what happens, I guess. Unless, but I don't want to answer for folks.
I just wanted to know, like, I saw another question about publishing expert level stuff, so I wanted to answer that one because it's something I'm thinking about a lot. We have talked very generally about audiences. We've talked a little bit about, in person, K through 12, different media opportunities, but what the question is here, I don't know, can people see the questions in the Q&A? If you can't, it says, in regards to publishing the expert level stuff before publishing the audience driven side, there's an overabundance of options for publishing between social medias, Substacks, Medium, but also our own websites. Where should be our home for deeper content before we post to socials? Think strategically about where the people are that you want to reach for that deeper content. So what I'm thinking about right now is a certain person ruined Twitter, which used to be the home of academics and where we would share new results. And it was a really important place where I would learn about what's going on in population genetics, in biological anthropology in general. But now many people have moved to LinkedIn or to Substack. So inform that by where other people are. Tentatively, I will say I've become less hot on Medium in general for a number of reasons that we don't have time to go into. But you want it to be as accessible as possible and on the platforms where you want to be having those deeper conversations. So go off of that and think about it not as a precursor to the broader audience stuff, but just a completely different audience that you want to engage with. And more people is not always going to be more impactful. You can have a really, really small crowd of people, but there are some places on Substack, there are lots of journalists. So maybe the one person who's going to read you write about your research is going to be a journalist who wants to write about your topic, right? So think about who, as well as, like, yes, reach many people, but think about who you want to reach.
There is a question in the chat that says, as someone in the social sciences myself, I'm always craving connection with more lab and field-based scientists. How do you work between different disciplines and backgrounds to better communicate with the public? I don't know if this is necessarily an answer to the second half of the question, but as a comment on the first half of the question, I love that. And I personally think society has lost the art of the cold email. If you want input from a field-based scientist, like just to use geology as an example, just figure out what the largest agency that hires geologists is, find a random person's email and email them. I think every major connection or opportunity, honestly, I've gotten in my field has been by cold emailing people. You obviously, like, it takes a bit to get used to doing it, and you don't want to like email them every week. But like my job at the Volcano Observatory, she told me the only reason why she hired me is because I wouldn't stop emailing them. And I emailed every 2 weeks I did that 4 times. And people are busy, and the worst they can do is not respond. But if you do that a couple of times, at least speaking from a research scientist perspective, we just love so much when somebody cares enough to ask. So if you email us a couple of times and you want feedback on something, usually we will respond. Or alternatively, you can actually email the offices of different like departments. If you find the admin email, they will send your request out to the entire listserv, and one of those 100 people will get back to you. And we would actually love to get contacted more about those things. There's a lot of people who want to be involved in that stuff, but don't really have the time or wherewithal to seek out the opportunities. So if you email us with them, that works out even better.
I love everything Denali just said, and they are so right. That's how I got my first job in TV. That's how I ended up working on Deadliest Catch and all these like many shows. I was up in the Arctic for a long time in the winter. I was so excited. My brothers were like, "Are you sure you haven't been demoted? Or they didn't send you away because they dislike having you closer to to the office?" So I kept getting sent to Alaska to work on shows because I sent emails while in college to people that I totally stranger dangered on LinkedIn. It was like before they had put a limit on how many emails you could send to people you didn't know. They probably put that limit because of me. Who knows? But I emailed people I admired. I said something specific to those people's work, right? I admire the shows you produce, and here's why. I then said a bit about myself, caveat, probably too much, so keep it brief. I don't know that I did. And I asked if they might be open to an informational interview. Could we chat for 15 or 30 minutes? Was a question that I asked, as opposed to, are you hiring? Are you hiring has a yes or no answer. Would you be open to talking? Anything's possible, whether or not there's a job open right now. The people that I emailed became my network, became my bosses, my mentors, and now my peers. I just had coffee with one of them yesterday, and she's actually asked me if I'm hiring. And it's such a trip to be in a position where, like, truly now we're in community. And I'm so fortunate that people said yes. But like Denali said, what's the worst that could happen? Someone doesn't reply. Okay.
And if someone does
The-
reply and they're really rude, you don't want to work with them anyway.
True. And the best that could happen, you don't even know about yet because you haven't sent the email. So send it.
That is amazing. Thank you all so much. I think that's a wonderful note for us to kind of wrap things up for today. Don't be afraid to try. You have really nothing to lose and who knows what to gain. So thank you everybody so much for your time. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for giving us some of their limited time and sharing their experiences with us. Thank you so much to our attendees who joined us, and of course the Explorers Clubs and all the folks in the club that have provided the technical support to make this possible. We do have a slide at the end where there are a couple of QR codes for attendees to kind of scan and provide some feedback for our survey. Tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't like. We really want to make these webinars as useful and accessible to folks as possible. And if you did like what you saw here today, we do have one more webinar next month on how you can find and fund your research. So you can register for that webinar right now if you're already sold. So thank you again, everybody, so much. Take care. And I think that's all we've got for today.